As for Drosnin, he expressed such confidence in his predictions that he said that if anyone could find the assassination of a prime minister in Moby Dick, he would believe them. Well, guess what? Brendan McKay is an expert in advanced probability theory, and he did exactly that.
Here, by way of comparison, we have Mr. Drosnin's example of
צנע, הרנות תראה לחיילים, חיילים במושבה, פם פם פם, אללה 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 אללה, אללה תתחבא מבין חיילי סבא, צנע, הרנות תראה לחיילים במושבה, אללה תתחבא מבין חיילי סבא, צנע, הרנות תראה חיילים במושבה, אללה תתחבא בי וחיילי סבא, צנע, הרנות תראה לחיילים במושבה, אללה תתחבא בי וחיילי סבא. צנע, 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 צנע.
כשאימא בהנה יפה וצעירה, אז אבא על גבעה בנה לבית. חלפו האביבים חצי ועברה, וטלטלים הפכו שיפה בינתיים.
אבל על חוף ירדן כמו מאומה לא קרה, אותה הדומיה וגם אותה התפורה.
חורשה באקליפטוס הגשר הסירה, וריח המלוח על המים. חורשה באקליפטוס הגשר הסירה, וריח המלוח על המים.
בשביל הנה יורדת ענת התינוקות, הם בירדן ישכשכו רגליים. גדלו הילדים וכבר למדו לשחות, ובני הנעורים חוקרים בשניים. אבל על חוף ירדן
חורשה באקליפטוס הגשר הסירה, וריח המלוח על המים. חורשה באקליפטוס הגשר הסירה, וריח המלוח על המים. מעבר לירדן אל עמו התותחים, והשלום חזר בסוף הקיץ.
וכל התינוקות היו לאנשים, ושוב על הגבעה הקימו בית.
אבל על חוף ירדן כמו מאומה לא קרה, אותה הדומיה וגם אותה התפורה. חורשה באקליפטוס הגשר הסירה, וריח המלוח על המים. חורשה באקליפטוס הגשר הסירה, וריח המלוח על המים.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יכה קר, וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, שא עיני אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל.
Shalom, everybody. Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to the World Alliance of Qara'im weekly Torah study. This is Hakham Melech ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im, and we are broadcasting to you today from Katsrin in the Golan Heights in Israel, where I have relocated as of a couple months ago. I probably will be taking a trip back to the United States in the near future for about a month, just to visit family. So if anyone's going to be in the New York area and you want to get together, let me know. Coffee's on. Oh, what's going on here? Coffee's on you. Just joking. Well, no, I'm not joking. We get together. You pay for the coffee. Okay. But other than that, enjoying my life very much here in the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights is absolutely gorgeous. It's always been my favorite area of the land of Israel. And now the wintertime is coming. So at night, I would say it's on average, it goes down to around maybe anywhere between, I'd say on average, high 40s to around 50 degrees, but it's been colder on some days. A little bit warmer on some days. Yeah, like high 40s is what it usually gets down to around now, although obviously it goes in waves, a little bit warmer, a little bit cooler. And there's been a lot of rain, so things are starting to green up. In Israel is a Mediterranean climate, so anyone who's lived in a Mediterranean climate or visited a Mediterranean climate knows that the winters are actually green. They're cool and green. Everything greens up. It's the rainy season. And so the most lush green time of the year in Israel is in the wintertime. It's not white. It doesn't snow. It does in the higher elevations. Actually, here in the Golan Heights, there are plenty of places where it's going to snow. Where I live in Katsrin, apparently it doesn't. This is my first winter here, so I don't know 100% for sure. Apparently it doesn't snow very often. But if I drive about 10 or 15 minutes, I'll hit the snow line. And there it is a slightly different story. But here is here in Israel in general, what happens is everything gets wet and green, and the wild flowers start coming out, and the grains start coming out, and it's beautiful. And then it all culminates in the springtime, right around Passover time, right around Pesach time, Chag HaMatzot time, where everything is just, the whole land of Israel comes alive with wildflowers and grasses and blooming trees, and it's just an incredible experience. But the winter here is very beautiful, and the fall here is very beautiful. There isn't so much of a changing of leaves to talk about, although a bit more in the Golan Heights, but there is a little bit of it. It's definitely not like in Vermont or something like that, but there is a little bit of that. So yeah, so that's life here in the Golan Heights in Katsrin. I have officially announced, as I mentioned, that we'd like to start our first World Alliance of Qara'im community here in Katsrin. So please come one and all. Drop whatever you're doing, book a flight, and come to Israel and be part of the community. That is the plan, to start a Karaite community here in the Golan Heights, here in Katsarin. I think it's an excellent place to do it. Maybe eventually we'll spread out and have a satellite community in Yerushalayim and in other places, but the first step would be here in Katsarin. In the meantime, what I do is I go to the rabbinical synagogue here, and I really enjoy it there. They're very nice people, and that's the main reason why I wasn't here for the past 2 weeks. I was, I'm becoming more connected with other people in the community there, and so there are all kinds of events and stuff like that. So I got a little bit caught up in that, but I decided I need to really refocus on doing the weekly study. So hopefully, most, if not all, of the Shabbats, we're going to be coming back to doing the weekly studies. And that is the situation. Yeah, going to a rabbinical synagogue it's a bit difficult for me at times because of all the nonsense that goes on there, which I've mentioned many times. The praying in Aramaic, the bowing and kissing of the Torah scroll like it's an idol, the bizarre rabbinical interpretations which are flung around in every direction all the time. But you know what? They're very open and accepting. A bunch of them know that I'm a Karaite, that I do not believe in the quote unquote so-called oral law of the rabbis, and they accept me just fine. And it's overall I enjoy myself there, and it's good to be part of a community. We don't have a Karaite community here yet, so I'm part of that community, and I've met some very nice people and made some very nice friends there. So I'm happy with it, all things considered. Okay, so let's see. So, but last week I was not in. Oh boy, it's hot. Here, hold on a second. I've got to turn off the heat. Just give me 1 second, please. There we go. But last week I was not here for the entire week. I was in Jerusalem, in Yerushalayim, and I went to some places that I'd never gone before, that I'd gone very briefly before, but checked them out much more in depth. And one of the main places I visited was the city of David. If you're ever in Jerusalem, I highly recommend going to visit the city of David. They've made incredible. If you were there 10 or 20 years ago, like I was when I first came to Israel, they've made incredible improvements since then. It's unbelievable. Everything's kind of enclosed now, and there are explanations of all the archaeological excavations. There's a guided tour. It's just very professional now, and they continue to what's a Moses scroll? I don't understand the question. Moses scroll? Did I say Moses scroll? At any rate, they continue to build up the. Maybe someone else wrote it. They continue to really improve the area, and there are some incredible archaeological finds, and I'll speak about some of them briefly. You can look on the YouTube channel of the World Alliance of Qara'im. So I have 2 YouTube channels. One is Karaite Insights, and one is World Alliance of Qara'im. And I've been doing more of the content on the World Alliance of Qara'im lately. So if you look on the YouTube channel of World Alliance of Qara'im, let me see, get well, just type in World Alliance of Qara'im. I think it's at World Alliance Qara'im. If you go to YouTube and search World Alliance of Qara'im, it should come right up. And what was I saying? Right. So if you look there, I did a bunch of videos, and one of the main things I wanted to do was find and touch Nehemiah's wall. So I'd been reading the book of Nehemiah recently. I go through all the books of the Tanakh kind of in a cycle, and recently I was up to the book of Nehemiah. So one of the main things that Nehemiah does, maybe the main thing that Nehemiah does, as described in the book of Nehemiah, is he comes back from serving as the cupbearer to King Ahasuerus in Persia, and the king allows him to go back to Judea to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and to kind of refurbish or what's the word I'm looking for? Not refurbish. I can't think of it. So refurbish the Jewish settlement there, and that's what he does. And he gets to Jerusalem, and he does this famous night journey. He takes a horse, or it doesn't say horse actually. It takes his animal, and maybe it was a donkey, maybe it was a horse, and a couple of people, and he does this night ride around the walls of Jerusalem to survey the situation, and he's appalled by what he sees. Pretty much the wall is broken down, all of the gates are destroyed. Everything is in bad shape, and then he takes it upon himself to rebuild the wall. Well, this was his plan before he came from Persia. So he takes it upon himself to rebuild the wall. So within 52 days, I think it's 52, yes, 54, 52, 52, I believe. Within 52 days, he and his crew rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and reestablish the city as Nehemiah says in the book of Nehemiah, to take away the cherpa, to take away the shame of the city. The city in ancient times that did not have a wall around it was a shame. It was an embarrassment. It was open to attack by its enemies, and especially the state of Jerusalem's walls, which when he sees them, he sees all of the walls. He still sees the remains of the wall. And we're talking about, let's see, he built his wall, I think it's dated to 445 BCE. The Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem 586 BCE. So we're talking over 100 years later, 150 years later almost, if I'm doing that math correctly. And he sees the destruction of Jerusalem's walls, and he is very upset by this shame and this embarrassment of this great city, the city of God, that's in such a state that it doesn't even have a wall around it, right? Which it would almost be like a woman walking around in public naked, right? The shame of that. That would be the equivalent of a great city like Jerusalem not having a wall around it. So he takes it upon himself to organize the crews to rebuild the wall, and he rebuilds the wall of Jerusalem, as we said, in 52 days. And part of that wall has been found, at least according to the main archaeologist in recent times. She's now dead, unfortunately. I think she died about 5 years ago. Eilat Mazar excavated a whole bunch of areas in the city of David, and found, among other things, what she believes was King David's palace, or the lower palace. Solomon, who also built the temple, built a Beit Melech Elyon, an upper palace, closer to the Temple Mount. Remember, David did not build the temple. David wanted to build the temple, and then Yahweh said that he cannot do it because David's hands were too full of blood. And so he says, your son will do it. And it's Solomon, David's son, who ends up building the temple up on the Temple Mount. David purchases the property where the temple, of the Temple Mount. It's at the end of the second book of Samuel, when he purchases the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite, and that becomes the site of where the temple is built. But it's Solomon, his son, who builds the temple. So all of the buildings that are connected to the temple and connected really to Solomon are up on the Temple Mount, up on the hill. And let's see, should I bring up a map of Jerusalem? No, I'm not going to bring up a map of Jerusalem right now. But David, he spent most of his time down below the Temple Mount in the city of David. So a lot of the stuff in the city of David that's been excavated is connected with David himself, including what Eilat Mazar believes was David's temple. Not to be confused with Solomon's temple that's described in detail when Solomon builds the holy temple. He also builds not Solomon's temple, Solomon's palace. He also builds a palace for himself, and that's described in great detail in the Tanakh, in First Kings. And but down below, when Nehemiah rebuilt the walls of the city when he rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem, he of course rebuilt both the lower and the upper parts, and it describes in great excruciating detail in Nehemiah chapter 3 where he built and who exactly built the various sections of the wall, and that includes walls, that includes parts of the city down below in what's known as the city of David, and it includes stretching up towards towards the Temple Mount, because it speaks about something called the Ophel, which is kind of the area in between the Temple Mount and the Temple Mount above and the city of David below. And then it speaks about the Sha'ar Amayim, the Water's Gate. The Water's Gate in Nehemiah chapter 18 is where Nehemiah, we know as Karaites, we've spoken during Sukkot about how Nehemiah tells the people to go out and gather various species to build Sukkot out of, and this was done through a public reading of the Torah, which took place at something called the Water's Gate. Well, they've also the same archaeologist, Eilat Mazar, who has excavated the Water Gate, and that's up higher in a place called the Ophel, which is kind of between the city of David below and the Temple Mount above. And all of this you can see live if you go to Jerusalem. There are 2 places that I recommend. I recommend visiting the city of David and specifically doing the guided tour. It's absolutely incredible. And then I recommend going to something called the Davidson Archaeological Center, and that basically allows you to explore the area closer to the Temple Mount, or actually on the Temple Mount, and a little bit lower, the Ophel, which connects the Temple Mount above to the city of David below. So these are some things I saw there. And another thing I did was walk through Hezekiah's tunnel. So Hezekiah's tunnel is mentioned explicitly in the Tanakh. We can even read that. Let's make that our little Tanakh reading for today. Let me find it. So, and I did a video now walking through this Hezekiah's tunnel, or the Siloam tunnel. Was really an incredible experience, because I don't even know how to explain it, but just from my own perspective, it was unbelievable. I'd never gone through it before. I'd been to the place where it empties out, but I'd never actually gone through the tunnel before. And the walk is about, I think it took me somewhere between 20 minutes and half an hour. I'd say about 25 minutes. It's this long tunnel. There are no lights at all. It's very thin. It's completely made out of stone. It's man-made, so it's hewn, which was the whole point of it. And it's very narrow. And if one is claustrophobic, one would easily feel that there. And you just go through this tunnel minute after minute after minute. And if you've never been through it before, you don't know where it ends. And there's no light in there. I had to use my own flashlight. I had to use my cell phone flashlight. And it just goes on forever. No exits, no emergency exits, no windows, no nothing. You're just going through this long, long tunnel. And what's more than that is, since I went last week, and last week it's wintertime in Jerusalem, and there are not a lot of tourists anyway because of the war. But in the wintertime, there are even fewer tourists. And I was in my tour group, there were 2 other people, very nice people, and the tour guide. And they didn't want to go through the tunnel. So I was the only one who wanted to go through the tunnel. She asked me, do you want to go through the tunnel? I said, well, I don't want to, but I have to, because this is one of the most important archaeological finds in all of the land of Israel relating to the Torah, and to the Tanakh, I should say. And so I did, and I was the only one in the tunnel. There were no other tourists. There was no one else in my group that wanted to go through my tunnel. The tour guide didn't go through me, not through me. I'm not a ghost yet. And so I went through this tunnel on my own, this thin, narrow stone, or tunnel hewn out of stone, completely dark inside, aside from the flashlight that I had. Oh, and did I mention the running water? The whole point of the tunnel was to divert water from the Gihon spring. The Gihon spring is the main water source of Jerusalem, was in ancient times, of the city of David, of ancient Jerusalem. And the purpose of building, of Hezekiah building his tunnel, was to divert water from the Gihon spring, because the Gihon spring is outside of Jerusalem, so it was vulnerable to attack. in the case of Hezekiah, by the Syrians under the king Sennacherib, and to build a tunnel to divert that water away from the spring into a place called the pool of Siloam, the Berechat Shiloach, which is inside the city walls of Jerusalem. So basically, to take the water from where it emerges from the ground and run it into, which is outside the city walls, and run it to a place inside the city walls of Jerusalem. And that was the tunnel of Hezekiah. Let's read a little bit about it. Okay. So I'll just read out loud. So the newer Siloam tunnel, also known as Hezekiah's tunnel, and maybe what I'll do is maybe I'll share the screen here. Okay. Here we go. So the newer Siloam tunnel, also known as Hezekiah's tunnel, is a water tunnel that was carved within the city of David in ancient times, now located in the Palestinian, quote unquote, Palestinian neighborhood of Silwan in East Jerusalem. Which is not exactly accurate. That neighborhood is shared by both Arabs and Jews. Its popular name is due to the most common hypothesis, and I would say it's more than a hypothesis, as we'll see in a second, is due to the most common hypothesis that it dates from the reign of Hezekiah of Judah, late 8th and excuse me, and early 7th century BCE, and corresponds to the conduit mentioned in 2 Kings 20 in the Hebrew Bible, which we'll read in a second. But let's read through this a bit more. According to the Bible, King Hezekiah prepared Jerusalem for an impending siege by the Syrians by blocking the source of the waters of the upper Gihon and leading them straight down on the west to the city of David. And that's 2 Chronicles 32. That's the other place where it speaks about this. Okay. Let's read on a bit. By diverting the waters of the Gihon, he prevented the enemy forces under Sennacherib from having access to the water, and also from preventing the Jews from having access, he prevented the enemy forces from having access from the water, and he prevented them from preventing the Jews from having access to the water, since there was a siege around Jerusalem. An older water system, sometimes called Shiloam Channel, partly fulfilled a similar purpose and dates back to the Canaanites. So we're not going to talk about Siloam Channel. The idea of dating the tunnel to Hezekiah's period was derived from the biblical text that describes construction of a water tunnel in his time. Scientific support for this, however, came from radiocarbon dates of organic matter contained in the original plastering, as well as radiometry. Okay. The dates were challenged in 2011, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, well, that's biblical archaeology for you. It's always going to be challenged. Okay, let's move on a bit. The tunnel leads from the Gihon Spring, and here we're going to have a map, which I'll put up in a second. The tunnel leads from the Gihon Spring. So remember, we said the Gihon Spring was, aside from rainwater, was basically the only source of water for Jerusalem in ancient times. And it still exists to this day. In fact, the water in this tunnel, in the tunnel of Hezekiah that I walked through, and you could walk through too if you come to Jerusalem, is flowing out of the Gihon Spring and towards this pool of Siloam. Okay, so the tunnel leads from the Gihon Spring to the pool of Siloam. If indeed built by Hezekiah, dates to a time when Jerusalem was preparing for an impending siege by the Syrians led by Sennacherib. Since the Gihon Spring was already protected by a massive tower and was included in the city's defensive wall system, which is kind of true. It was down below the wall, but yes, it was enclosed by a wall. But since it was lower down, it was more vulnerable to attack. Jerusalem seems to have been supplied by enough water in case of siege, even without this tunnel. According to Aaron Horowitz, whoever that is, the director of the Megalim Institute, whatever that is, the tunnel can be interpreted as an additional aqueduct designed for keeping the entire outflow of the spring inside the walled area, which included the downstream pool of Siloam, with the specific purpose of withholding water from the besieging forces. So I guess what he's saying is maybe some of the water flowed out into the valley below, known as the Kidron Valley, and so they wanted to divert that water to make sure that the Syrian army didn't have access to the water. But I guess what this guy is saying, and maybe he's right, is that the protective, and there was this kind of structure that was built around the Gihon Spring, was enough to protect it or enough to protect it in the sense that the Israelites under siege could still have access to the water, but nonetheless, some was dripping out, and therefore the goal of the tunnel was to make sure that the Assyrian army didn't have get hold of any of the water that was dripping out. In other words, to starve out the Assyrian army. Okay. Both the spring itself and the pool at the end of the tunnel would have been used by the inhabitants as water sources. Troops positioned outside the walls wouldn't have reached any of it, because even the overflow water released from the pool of Siloam would have fully disappeared into a karstic system, which I don't even know what that means. Karst is topography formed from the dissolution of soluble carbonate rocks such as limestone and dolomite. It is characterized by features like pulgus above and drainage systems with sinks and caves underground. There's some evidence that, whatever it is, I guess it means that the water is going to sink quickly down to the ground. Located right outside the southern tip of the city walls, in contrast to that, the previous water system did release the water that was all the water not used by the city population into the Kidron Valley to the east, where besieging troops could have taken advantage of it. Okay, so I guess that's what this person is saying. We don't need to get into that. That's really for my own edification more than anything else. So let's talk a bit about the tunnel. The curving tunnel is 533 yards. That's 583 yards, 533 meters, about a third of a mile. It's long. And by using the 12-inch, 30-centimeter altitude difference between its two ends, which corresponds to a 0.06 gradient, the engineers managed to convey the water from the spring to the pool. Okay. So if we bring up a map here, we could see. Let's see if I can make this a bit bigger. I think it's kind of hard to see here. Old pool. Yeah, it's not a good map, and we don't need to do this now. So let me get rid of the map. We don't need to get that deep into it. But let's read a little bit more. According to the Siloam's inscription, the tunnel was carved out of the living rock by two teams, one starting at each end of the tunnel and then meeting in the middle. The inscription is partly unreadable at present and may originally have conveyed more information than this. It is clear from the tunnel itself that several directional errors were made during its construction. Recent scholarship has discredited the idea that the tunnel may have been formed by substantially widening a pre-existing natural karst. How the Israelite engineers dealt with the difficult feat of making two teams digging from opposite ends meet far underground is still not fully understood, but some suggest that the two teams were directed from above by sound signals generated by hammering on the solid rock through which the tunnels were digging. Okay. And then we have, of course, the famous inscription. Let's just talk about this briefly for 1 second. So the Siloam inscription is a Hebrew inscription found in the Siloam tunnel. It's no longer in the Siloam tunnel, which brings water from the Gihon spring to the pool of Siloam, located in the city of David in East Jerusalem, neighborhood of Silwan. The inscription records the construction of the tunnel, which has been dated to the 8th century BCE on the basis of the writing style. It is the only known ancient inscription from ancient Israel and Judah which commemorates a public construction work, despite such inscriptions being commonplace in Egyptian and Mesopotamian archaeology. It is among the oldest extant records of its kind written in Hebrew using the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet, a regional variant of the Phoenician alphabet. The inscription is part of the collections of the Istanbul Archaeology Museum. So that's where you can find it now. It was discovered in 1838, as we see, by archaeologist Edward Robinson. At the time it was discovered, the land of Israel was controlled by the Turks, by the Ottoman Turks, and so therefore the plaque was removed from its place within the tunnel and brought back to Istanbul, to Turkey, and there it is in the Istanbul Archaeological, or the Istanbul Archaeology Museum. Okay, and what does it actually say? Let's see. One second. Okay, so the actual inscription is here. Behold the tunnel. Now, this is the matter of the tunnel. Of course, it's in ancient Hebrew, but I'm reading it in English. While the stonecutters were lifting the axe, one man towards his neighbor, and while there remained 3 cubits to be cut, the voice of a man could be heard calling out to his neighbor. For there had been only its side deviation in the rock face, where they were supposed to meet up on the right and on the left. And on the day when the tunnel was being cut out, the stonecutters struck each man in front of his neighbor, axe against axe, and the waters from the source flowed into the pool for a distance of 1,200 cubits. Now, 100 cubits was the height over the head of the stone cutter. So that's the actual inscription that was found in the middle of the tunnel. It's, as I said, since been removed, and it is now in Istanbul, in Turkey. But the tunnel is still there. It's kind of hard to move a third of a mile long stone tunnel that's 100 meters or 100 cubits under the ground. Okay, so these are some of the things that I saw in Jerusalem. Absolutely amazing things. Again, I recommend, if you're interested in this, checking out the YouTube videos that I did on the World Alliance of Qara'im YouTube channel, and you can see some more for yourself. And if you're in Jerusalem, I highly recommend visiting this on your own. And more than that, if you're in Jerusalem and if you ever come to Jerusalem, or if you live in Israel and you want to arrange a time to meet up and go together, then that is also a possibility. I would love to show these things that are there and learn more myself about all of the excavations that they're doing and have done in the city of David. It's amazing. And what I shared with you now is just a small part of it. They've found many other things as well, including the shaft where Yoav ben Suruyah, he climbs up into the city of Jerusalem to conquer Jerusalem from the Jebusites. That's known as Warren Shaft, although now archaeologists are saying maybe that's not where he climbed up, but that's biblical archaeology for you. It's constantly in flux, and everyone has their own opinion. Opinions in biblical archaeology are as common as chocolates. Okay, so I did want to read through the verses in the Tanakh that speak about Hezekiah's tunnel. Let's do this very briefly, and then we'll go on to today's Torah study. So we have 1 Kings chapter 20. Just find it for a second. So it's, I'm sorry, 2 Kings chapter 20. So let's take a look at that. By the way, can you guys all hear me okay? Sound and video are fine? Shabbat Shalom, Hector. Sound and video okay, everybody? Somebody just type in Y if you guys can hear me and if the video is okay. Because I never know. Okay, good. So, in 1 Kings chapter 20, let's go over to the Hebrew. I'm sorry, 2 Kings chapter 20. 2 Kings 20, verse 20. That's weird. Oh, okay, right. Okay, there we go. So this is mention of it. So this is at the end of Hezekiah's reign. And it gives a summary of all of the things that Hezekiah did. And Hezekiah was one of the good kings of Judah. There were a couple of them. And it says here in 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 20, "We yeter divrei Hizkiyahu v'chol gvurato wa asher asa eth habarecha wa eth hati'ala wa yaveh et hamayim ha'ira Elohim kituvim al sefer divrei ha'yomim Nemalchei Yehuda." And let me translate this. So I'll just read it now with a regular modern Hebrew accent instead of the biblical or supposed Tiberian accent. We won't get into that right now, but we'll call it the biblical Hebrew accent. Okay, Yeter Divrei Chizkiyahu. So the further acts of Hezekiah, V'chol Gvurato, and all of his heroism. And the fact that he made the pool. What are we talking about? We're talking about the pool where this tunnel empties out into. If indeed a tunnel, which I believe it is referring to this. So the pool, that's the Siloam pool or the Shiloach pool. And the tunnel. And here it is. It says right here, okay, the channel or the tunnel or the aqueduct, you can translate this as. Okay. So he made the pool and the aqueduct. So the pool where it empties out into inside the city walls, and the tunnel. That's Hezekiah's tunnel being referred to right there in 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 20. Why? I'm sorry, I'm going to just do regular accent. We have et amayim ha'ira, and he brought the water into the city. Elohim, and he brought the water into the city. So it explains, right, exactly what. So here, once again, and the fact that he made the pool and the tunnel and brought the water into the city. So there it is right there. We have this verse in the Tanakh, 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 20, and that is supported by biblical archaeology. This is supported by what has been found in the city of David, and you can walk through this tunnel yourself, as I did last week. So once again, we see the Tanakh coming to life through biblical archaeology in our day. It's one of the many ways it comes to life, but one of the ways is through biblical archaeology that shows that the things that are spoken about in the Tanakh, so many of them have now been proven to actually have happened. Okay, and are they not? Is not all of this written? Is this not all written in the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? And talking about Chronicles, we can look very briefly Second Chronicles chapter 34. I'm sorry, 32. So Second Chronicles 32:30. Oops. Stretch. Second Chronicles chapter 32:30. And this retells the story of the invasion by Sancheriv, the king of Syria, of his invasion of Judea, and eventually his Matzor, his siege of Jerusalem. And then we have, if we go down, let's start here. Verse 27. Waihi lachizkiyahu osher v'kavod harbei me'od. So Hiskiyahu had much riches, much wealth and honor. We osarot asalo lekesef ulezahav uleeven yikara ulebesamim ulemarinim ulechol klei chemda. And he stored up treasures of silver and gold and precious gemstones and incense, spices, maginim, shields, and every beautiful object. Verse 28. Umiskanot l'tvuat dagan v'tirosh v'yitzhar, and he made storage cities or storage. He made warehouses or storage areas, storage cities for the produce of wheat and wine and oil. Wa uraot lechol behema ubehema wa'adarim le'awerot, and he made pens for every type of animal, meaning to store animals, wa'adarim, and herd and flocks, and adarim le'averot, and so he made pens for flocks as well. So basically, he had a lot of wealth, and he stored up all of these various things, including silver, gold, etc., but also foodstuffs and animals. Verse 29. We'arim asalo umikne saon ubakar larov. We could skip ahead a little bit. Here it is. So this is the verse right here that it's referring to once again. Okay, so we could skip 29. It's really not relevant. Basically, he had a lot of stuff. He was very rich. But here in verse 30, it says, Wehu Yehiskiyahu Sapam et Musa Meme Gihon Ha'elyon Wa Yashrem Lamata Ma'araba La'ir David Wa Yaslach Yehiskiyahu Bechol Ma'aseh. So it says here, Vehu Yehiskiyahu Satam et Musa Meme Gihon. So Hezekiah stopped up. He blocked the pouring out or the exit of the waters from the Gihon. Remember, we said the Gihon is the spring that is Jerusalem's main water source. It was Jerusalem's main water source in ancient times. Mimei Gihon Elyon, from the upper Gihon, or from the top of the Gihon, V'yashrei Lamata, and he made them go straight down, or he directed them downwards, Ma'arava, and to the west. So in other words, he directed them downwards into the west, which of course, if you want water to flow, you have to direct it downward. It has to be a downward slope. And to the west, La'ir David, into the city of David. What? Yatzlach Yechezkiyahu b'chol ma'aseh. And Yechezkiyahu and Yechezkiyahu was successful in all that he did. So once again, that's the second reference to him blocking up the waters of the Gihon and leading them west and downwards into the city of David. Again, biblical sources for Hezekiah's tunnel. Okay? So that's that. Maybe very briefly, just to bring all of this to life, so it's not just talk. Let me actually find the video that he did so you can get an idea, a little bit of an idea of Hezekiah's tunnel. And I'll just play it. Just give me a second for a minute or two, or for a couple of minutes, and then we'll go on to our regular Torah study. Let's see. One second, please. Your channel, videos, and there we go.
This is the tunnel that King Hezekiah. So we're in Hezekiah's tunnel. This is the tunnel that King Hezekiah had dug, and it was in the time of the attack of the Assyrians, led by the king Sennacherib, who attacked many cities in Israel, in the land of Israel, and then came to Yerushalayim and laid siege to the city. Hezekiah, anticipating the attack on Yerushalayim, knew that the spring, the Gihon spring, which was the water source for Jerusalem, which was outside the city walls, on the eastern side of the slope, or on the eastern slope outside the city walls of Jerusalem, knew that that spring, that water source was vulnerable to attack by the Assyrians. So he had this tunnel built, which diverted, which led from the Gihon spring into a point, or to a point within the city walls, called the Pool of Siloam, the Brechat Shiloach, which was just slightly 32 centimeters approximately lower in elevation than the spring itself, so the water was able to flow by gravity through this aqueduct. And in doing so, he was able to bring water into the city walls, within the city walls of Jerusalem, and thereby provide a water source for Jerusalem during the siege of Sennacherib of the Assyrians. Now, it speaks about how there was an inscription found, and hopefully we'll get to the place of that inscription. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but we'll try to find it. That speaks about, this tunnel and that inscription is one of the most important archaeological finds ever in the land of Israel. And the inscription speaks about how the workers dug from both sides, on the east from the Gihon spring, and on the west from the exit point, or the intended exit point of the Brechat Shiloach, the Siloam pool, and how they dug towards each other, and then when they got near each other in the middle, they heard the wielding of the axes. Each party heard the wielding of the axes from the other party. And they knew they were near. And then they were able to find each other's exact locations and make a hole that joined the two sides of the tunnel into one long tunnel. Now the inscription the original inscription was here inside this tunnel, but it's no longer here. It was excavated or was found. This tunnel was found during the time of the Ottoman Empire, during the time of the Turks, and therefore they took the inscription, removed it from the tunnel, and it is now in the National Museum, I believe it's called, of Istanbul in Turkey. So if you're ever in Istanbul, you can go see the original inscription. And we're going to walk a little bit more. In the end, Sancheriv did not conquer Yerushalayim. His army was suddenly called away, shall we say, and he left to go back to his hometown of Nineveh, and there's an inscription that was found written by Sancheriv, which speaks about how he conquered the various cities in Israel, but it doesn't say anything about his conquering Jerusalem. What it says is that he came to Jerusalem, and he had Hezekiah caged up or cornered like a bird in a cage. But it doesn't say anything in that inscription about his conquering of Jerusalem, which implies that inscription fortifies or reinforces the that he never did conquer Yerushalayim. So this is it, Hezekiah's tunnel. We're heading from the Gihon Spring towards the pool of Siloam, Shiloach, and we'll be out soon. You can read about all of this I don't have my Tanakh with me right now. Obviously, I'm walking through the tunnel. If I'm not mistaken, it's 2 Kings chapter 18. It speaks about all of the works, or all of this, the attack of Sancheriv on Yerushalayim and Chizkiyahu's response and preparation. And then it's also in 2 Chronicles chapter 34, if I'm not mistaken. I may be wrong about that. Like I said, I'm not exactly walking around my Tanakh right now. You can check it out. And that's it. That's all I have to say. This has been Hakham Melech ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im, broadcasting to you from Hezekiah's tunnel, somewhere underneath the city of David, the city of David, the original city that was conquered by David, by the head of his army, or who became the head of his army, Yoav ben Tzruya, by going up a water tunnel to bring his army up into the city and conquer it from the Jebusites.
Okay, we're gonna end there. I hope you enjoyed that video. So I don't know if you could tell, but I was actually a little bit scared in that tunnel. I'd never gone through the tunnel before. It's something I'd wanted to do for years, and I never did it before. This is my first time, and it's endless. The tour guide, the girl who was leading the tour, who is very nice and very knowledgeable, she said, "Oh, it's about 15 minutes." Well, it was much longer than 15 minutes, and you're just walking through this dark tunnel, trudging through the water. You can hear me trudging through the water. Nobody's there. I mean, there was nobody there in this tunnel. The world could have ended. There could have been a nuclear war in the time I was in that tunnel, and I would not have known about it. That's how isolated I was there underneath that tunnel. And again, I was completely alone because nobody else in the group wanted to come, and there were no tourists. There were not a lot of tourists there at the time. So it was a very, I remember thinking, God, I could like drop my phone or have a heart attack or something. Not that I'm prone to heart attacks, thank God, but I could, and that would be the end of me. No one would know. Like about 40 minutes later, they would say, "Hey, where's Melech? We better send a rescue party in there." But that's how isolated it was underneath there. There was absolutely nothing around, and I remember saying to myself, "Okay, this is a little bit scary," but it also put me into a very kind of meditative state, and I would say a state of just faith in Yahweh, where I said, "Okay, listen, there's going to be an end to this tunnel, figuratively, literally, and I will come out the other end and just relax, enjoy it. You know, it's a little bit scary. You're all alone here in the underground with nobody else around. You know, you saw what it was like, completely dark, aside from my flashlight, but it will be okay." And it was in the end. It took a lot longer than I thought, which also was, I guess, getting to me a little bit because, again, the tour guide said 15 minutes, and it really took me, I think, close to a half an hour. But it was just endless trudging through this dark, narrow tunnel, trudging through water, but eventually, yeah, made it to the other end, and it was quite an experience. I think next time, I think that actually they should make a rule there that people are not allowed to go into that tunnel alone. There should be at least 2 people. There should be a buddy system. There should be more than one flashlight. Let's say my flashlight had gone out, or my phone suddenly stopped operating, or something like that. You know, I would have been completely 100% in the dark. There's no communications there. There's no light there. There's nothing. You are underground, all alone in a tunnel. But it was quite an experience, I have to say. It really was quite an experience. Okay, so that's that. And let's go on now to Leviticus chapter 21. And we'll pick it up where we left off, which was verse 16. So let me bring that up. So if you remember, we're speaking about what Cohanim, what the priests are allowed to do and not allowed to do regarding mourning rituals. Okay, so maybe what we should do, just to catch up, I will read in English, because so I don't get caught trying to translate and extrapolate upon it again. So that'll take an hour by the time we get through that. I know myself, I always end up going on tangents. So to prevent that, I'll read the English verses 1 through 15, just so we can get back the context of where we were. And so when we continue on in verse 16, then we have this context. Okay, so Yahweh said to Moshe, "Speak to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, a priest must not make himself ceremonially unclean." That means, again, we know what that means. That means get the cooties. That means become tameh for any of his people. And it should really means his near kin who die, except for close relatives such as his mother or father, his son, his daughter, his brother, or an unmarried sister who is dependent on him since she has no husband. For her, he may make himself unclean. So because a priest has to stay in a state of ritual purity, a state of not having the cooties, because he's serving in the temple, or at least there's a lot of connections with the temple. So he's not allowed to go near a dead body, come into the vicinity of a dead body, which we know from earlier in Leviticus that will give him cause him to enter into a state of ritual uncleanliness. In other words, cause him to get the cooties. He's not allowed to have the cooties because he serves in the temple of Yahweh. He must not make himself unclean for people related to him by marriage, and so defile himself. Okay. Priests. So now we're talking about mourning rituals, which were common among the pagans. And the Torah is now saying that priests are not allowed to take part. No Israelites are allowed to take part in these pagan mourning rituals, but the priests are given special commandments, again, because of their special status within Israel. So priests must not shave their heads or shave off the edges of their beards. By the way, in the retelling of this in Deuteronomy, this is where, if you ever saw the Jews with the long payas, right? The long side curls. It comes from this commandment, not applying to the Cohanim in that case, applying all of Israel, but it comes from that commandment not to shave the edges of the beard. So the religious Orthodox Jews take that quite literally, and they will never ever shave this part of their beard, so it grows those long side locks, which are called peyot. Or I had a friend, believe it or not, I have a friend, I've known him since we're kids, and he actually was once, many years ago, he appeared on the Howard Stern show dressed up as a rabbi. He pretended to be a real rabbi. And he appeared on a segment called Black Jeopardy, where, oh no, was it Black, what was it called again? Right, yeah. Where it was him versus two black guys, and they asked all these questions about black culture. And since he was not a real rabbi, he just dressed up as a rabbi and pretended to be a rabbi. He actually knew most of his friends at the time were black, and he actually knew more about black culture than the black guys. And he actually won Black Jeopardy. So you have this guy who everyone thought was an Orthodox Jewish rabbi, basically beating or winning a game of Black Jeopardy on the Howard Stern show. Absolutely true story. And so one time Howard Stern says to him, "What are those things? What are those side locks you have there?" Right? And my friend says, "Oh, those are payas." He's pretending to be a rabbi. And then Howard Stern says, "That's what the Jews are always saying, pay us, pay us, pay us." Anywho, good times. Okay, so those side curls are peyot, or in Yiddish pronunciation, payas. And by the way, Howard Stern is Jewish from both sides. He used to say on the show, I'm not a big Howard Stern fan anymore. I used to be when I was younger. I used to listen to him all the time. I thought he was hilarious. But if you are, he always says that he's half Jewish and half Italian. He says his father is Jewish and his mother is Italian. That's a complete lie. How do I know? Because my father grew up with Howard Stern's mother in the Bronx, and I can assure you. And the parents have been over my parents' house many times over the years, and I can assure you they're both 100% Jewish. So much for that. Okay. So, priests must not shave their heads or shave off the edge. They must be holy to their God and must not profane the name of their God, because they present the food offerings to Yahweh, the food of their God. They are to be holy. Okay. So they're not allowed to, what did we learn? They're not allowed to enter into a state of ritual impurity by coming in contact with a dead body, except for their very close relatives. They're not allowed to carry on, partake in any of these pagan mourning rituals. And here, they must not marry women defiled by prostitution or divorced from their husbands, because priests are holy to their God. Regard them as holy because they offer up the food of your God. Consider them holy because I, the Lord, am holy, who make you holy. Okay, so they're not allowed to marry someone who's a former prostitute or who is who's divorced. They are allowed to marry a widowed woman. And we'll see that the high priest is not allowed to marry even a widow. If a priest's daughter defiles herself by becoming a prostitute, she disgraces her father, she must be burnt in the fire. Okay? So it's bad enough. Well, I don't want to, we have someone here who I think was very sensitive about this, so I don't want to go into it too much. But basically, the daughter of the priestess, just as the priest is held to a higher standard, so her daughter, who represents her, right, also is held to a higher standard. Verse 10, the high priest, the one among his brothers who has had the anointing oil poured on his head and who has been ordained to wear the priestly garments, must not let his hair become unkempt or tear his clothes. So these are two other mourning rituals that are not pagan rituals. These are rituals that are recorded many times throughout the Tanakh, or a bunch of times throughout the Tanakh, as acceptable mourning rituals. So the other Kohanim can partake in these rituals because they're acceptable, right? They don't involve defiling of one's own body, permanent or scarring of one's own body. But a high priest is not allowed to even do these acceptable mourning rituals. This is the high priest, right? This is the chief cook and bottle washer, right? The chief kahuna, the top kahuna. So he's not allowed even to do these acceptable mourning rituals. Why? Ostensibly because he's wearing the priestly garments. He has a special priestly garments on, and so it would not be appropriate to tear his clothes. That's for sure. He'd be tearing the special priestly garments, and to take off the turban. It's called the mitznefet, and dishevel his hair, or even remove it, because then again he, in a sense, would be defiling these special priestly garments, which we spoke about extensively when we were studying the book of Exodus. Okay. Verse 11. He must not enter a place where there is a dead body. He must not make himself unclean, even for his father or mother. So, whereas the regular priest is allowed to get the cooties for his mother, father, sister, brother, the high priest is not allowed to defile himself, is not allowed to get the cooties, even for his own mother or father, because, again, he's in close contact with the temple, and once a year enters into the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was. And so we cannot leave any chance with the high priest that he, in any way, shape, or form, contacts any type of ritual impurity, that he gets the cooties, nor leave the sanctuary of his God or desecrate it, because he has been dedicated by the anointing oil of his God. I am Yahweh. I am the Lord. Okay? So nor leave the sanctuary of his God. Again, what I think this means is while he's dressed in his priestly garments, he's not allowed to leave and go mourn for his parents. Okay? Even for his parents. Okay. The woman he marries must be a virgin. He must not marry a widow, a divorced woman, or a woman defiled by prostitution. So whereas a regular priest cannot marry a divorcee or a former prostitute, but may marry a widow, the high priest cannot even marry a widow. He must marry a virgin, but only a virgin from his own people, so that he will not defile his offspring among his people. I am Yahweh, who makes him holy. Okay? So we got that. Oh, I didn't. Howard Stern is a jerk. Oh, guys, you should have told me. I didn't have it on, but it's okay. Let me share the screen now. If ever I'm reading verses from the Tanakh and you don't see it, then please let me know. There we go. Okay, so Howard Stern is a jerk. I spent Stuttering John. I remember Stuttering John. He tried to stick a microphone up my woohoo when I bent down. Yeah, not exactly the most classy people. I also have just come to absolutely, I think, when you're younger, it's all cool and funny. I mean, I have to admit, Howard Stern was hilarious. I don't think he's hilarious anymore, but it's also, it's kind of wears thin after a while, that type of humor. Be right back. I'm just gonna go grab a cup with water. I'll be right back. I'm not gonna put on pause. Where did you meet them, Marianne? Did they come to the ranch? Okay. So that brings us to Leviticus chapter 21, verse 16. So let's dig in. We'll switch over to the Hebrew. And our goal is to finish Leviticus 21 today. I hope we should be able to. Let me bring up my various commentaries that we generally use. So just give me a minute here. Look maybe a little bit Ibn Ezra. Okay, so Leviticus 21. Okay. All right, so all right, so we're in Leviticus 21:16. Switch over here to the Hebrew. Okay. So, verse 16. Waidaber Yahweh el Moshe lemor. So Yahweh spoke to Moses to say. Verse 17. Daber el Aharon lemor. Speak to Aaron, meaning to the priests, meaning this is a law that's directed toward the priests. Lemor, ish me zar acha le dorotom asher yihye bo mum lo yikrav le akriv lehem Elohau. So speak to Aaron, say, any person from of your descendants, literally of your seed, which often means the male descendants, although not always, but the basic idea of your seed is the male descendants. Seed is also the Hebrew word for semen, so it means passed down through the males, right? Throughout your generations, asher ye'ebomum, who has any kind of blemish, lo yikrav lakriv lehem Elohau. He shall not approach to bring forth the food of his God. In other words, if any priest has any kind of blemishes, and we'll speak about which blemishes, okay, in a second as examples, but if a priest has some kind of blemish, like let's say he's missing a leg or missing an eye, or I don't know, use your imagination, then he's not allowed to serve in the temple as a priest. He can serve in other capacities as a priest because the priests had other roles, okay? But he's not allowed to serve in the temple. The temple, see, Judaism, Torah, is not and was not an ascetic religion. It's an aesthetic religion. If you look at the temple, we spoke extensively when we studied the book of Exodus. If you look at the temple, it's beautiful, right? You have things made out of furniture made out of gold, beautiful, different types of dyes. Let me do it this way, right? Different substances, different types of dyes, precious gemstones on, let's say, the Choshen HaMishpat, the breastplate of the priest. So Torah is not ascetic. It does not say that the beauty of this world is irrelevant, is pasul, has no worth, has no value. Quite the opposite. It's very aesthetic. Everything in the realm of Yahweh is beautiful. again, the temple, the tabernacle, the clothes of the Cohanim, the incense smells beautiful, the menorah, the ark cover, the ark itself, right? Everything is very aesthetic. It's very beautiful. And part of that aesthetic is the Kohanim, is the priests serving in the temple, and they have to look the part. Okay, imagine, and lest you think that's kind of cruel. Well, tough luck. Life is not fair, right? That's just the bottom line. Imagine if you went on some discount airline, okay, and I think this is actually happening today, and all the stewardesses, instead of being skinny and pretty, and I'm sorry to be quote unquote sexist, but that's the fact. To this day, airlines are going to hire good looking stewardesses. Okay. Let's say they were all like, fat and smelled, and you're not going to fly that airline again. Okay. Or let's say one was missing a leg and another was missing an arm, and the other had, their face had been burnt in a fire and whatever. Right. These are horrible things. I'm not making light of them. But the fact of the matter is that when you are representing an entity, when you're representing an organization, when you're representing a business, even, you've got to look the part. You've got to look the part. Okay, your physical features give a good impression, or one's positive physical features give a good impression for that organization, that company, that entity. Okay, would you fly an airline again if you were served by a bunch of, fat, smelly, ugly stewardesses with all kinds of physical deformities? No, you'll go fly something else, right? That's it may sound mean or cruel, but that's just the bottom line. Okay. And so the Torah, again, is not ascetic, it's aesthetic. Why? Because look at the beauty of Yahweh's world. Go out into nature. Everything's beautiful and aesthetic. Yeah, there are some disgusting things like, maggots. But in general, you travel around the world and you see the beauty of Yahweh's creations. He made the world to be a beautiful place. And that applies as it applies in nature, as it applies when we look up at the stars or look at the sun or walk through a forest. It also applies even in man-made things, right? A beautiful house, a beautiful car. These are all, when you do something beautiful, a beautiful meal that you prepare, right? When you really put love into a meal, you're channeling this aesthetic, this idea of beauty that Yahweh has built into the world for us to recognize beautiful things and to recognize things that are not beautiful. And you're channeling that into the real world. Even when we make beautiful things, we make a beautiful work of art. I'm talking about some of this modern art nonsense, but a beautiful work of art. If we, make a beautiful craft. Let's say we like to do pottery, or we're a carpenter. We like to make tables, right? If it's beautiful and aesthetic, you're channeling the wisdom and the natural aesthetic that Yahweh placed into us, because it takes effort to make something beautiful, and it takes non-effort to make something that's not beautiful, right? You just slap something together, chances are it's not going to be beautiful. But if you really put your heart and your soul into something, chances are it is going to be beautiful. And that, I think, is the idea here, is that, yes, it's unfortunate if there are priests, if there are Kohanim who have these problems, who have blemishes, but we're not making a judgment on them as a human being. We're just saying they can't be part of the show. Okay, imagine if you went to Radio City Music Hall. If anybody goes there anymore, I don't know. I haven't been in New York in a number of years, although I'm going back to New York soon probably. But I doubt I'll go to Radio City Music Hall. And you go to see the Rockettes, and instead of out coming, beautiful dancing girls, comes, Hillary Clinton and Monica Lewinsky and Nancy Pelosi. You're going to ask here. First of all, you're going to give them a very bad review on TripAdvisor, and second of all, you're going to ask for your money back, and you're never going to come again. That's reality, people, right? So there is an aesthetic. There's very much an aesthetic, just as there is in Yahweh's world, and just as there is, excuse me, when human beings create, they put their heart and soul into it. So there is, especially, maybe even especially within Yahweh's tabernacle / temple, there's an aesthetic to it. It has to look beautiful. It has to smell beautiful. It has to sound beautiful. Yeah, the Levites. Now the dances are they them. That's right. Right, Kamala. The dancers are concerned with they them, and I'm concerned with you. Right? Wasn't that the Trump commercial? Anywho, so anyway, I think you get the idea, right? The temple has to be a place of aesthetic beauty. This idea that the physical world is unimportant is really foreign to Torah. It's really foreign to Judaism. It made its way into Judaism later, as ascetic religions had their influence, and ascetic cultures and ascetic philosophies had their influence on Judaism. But it's very foreign to the Torah. The Torah very much appreciates, respects, and honors physical beauty when it's an expression of the wisdom and the generosity and the beautiful aesthetic of Yahweh. Okay. Alrighty. So that being said, so we're in verse 18, and let's see if, by the way, if Robert Alter has anything to say about that one. No. Okay. So verse 18. Kikol ish sher bo mum lo yikrav ish iwer o pisach o harum or sarua. So we have now different types of blemishes, and I think these are examples rather than exhaustive. Okay, they're giving an idea of the type of priests that are not allowed to serve in the temple. So iwer is blind, pisach is lame, meaning one of his feet or legs is inoperative. Harum, they just translate this here as disfigured, and sarua, deformed. Okay, so again, no one. Why do I say they translated? Because these are words that are a little bit not sure what they mean. So let's see how Robert Alter translates it. As a matter of fact, okay. So blind, lame, disfigured, or malformed is the way he translates it. Let's see if he has anything to say about that. So no man in whom there is a defect. And what does Robert Alter say about that? The underlying notion, however, make this a bit bigger so it's easier to see on the screen. Make this a bit bigger too. So the underlying notion, however objectionable to modern sensibilities, is one shared by many ancient religions, just as the animal offered in sacrifice, that's a very good point, which I should have mentioned, must be unblemished. The officiant offering the sacrifice must be without physical blemish. Excuse me. Okay, so then we have these two words, and we're going to see that nobody knows really what they mean. So the two Hebrew terms, harum and sarua, have long been objects of philological, that means word speculation. Their exact meaning remains in doubt, though it is clear that they refer to some sort of physical deformity. Okay, so there we go. And remember my tip or my trick that I told you. How do you know if nobody knows what a Hebrew word means? And there are plenty of Hebrew words throughout the Tanakh that nobody, even the top scholars, nobody is sure exactly what they mean. If you look at 5 different English translations and you get 5 different translations of that word into English, or even 2 or 3, then you can bet that nobody really knows what the word means. When somebody really knows what the word means, all of the translations will be very consistent. And when the meaning of the word is not known, then you're going to get that phenomenon where every interpreter, every translator, which we always say translation is an interpretation because the words you choose are your way of, or depending on how you interpret the original. So, so if you see 3 or 4 or 5 different translations, then you could bet that nobody really knows what the original Hebrew word means, and they're each person or each translation is kind of speculating. Okay, let's move on. Verse 19. Just for fun, we can see maybe what Ibn Ezra says about it. So Ibn Ezra, as you know, is one of my favorite commentators. He's a rabbinical commentator, but he's very good. He is definitely rabbinical, but he leans, I would say, leans in a Karaite direction. Unlike Rashi, the star of the rabbinical commentators, who is one of the worst Torah commentators I've ever come across. Absolutely horrible. Confusing. None of what he says makes sense. Ibn Ezra, the rabbinical is quite the opposite. He makes a lot of very, very brilliant points. So we're in, where are we? Vayikra 21 and 18. Okay, so the use of the translations into English, and I don't know why they don't anymore, because sometimes the medieval Hebrew is a little bit difficult to understand, but we'll make the best of it. So harum, so the first word of fach, hefek sarua, it's the opposite of sarua, the next word. Wahine harum, migzeret haram. So, or cherem. So he's saying it's related to the word cherem, which would mean unfit. Sarua migzerat mistareya. So mistareya means to kind of like, I guess, walk on a limb or to spread out in modern Hebrew. And he's saying it's related to that. But again, without these English translations, they used to have the English translations. Where did it go? I don't know. It was very, very helpful. So that's that. Okay. Oh, my cat is knocking on the door. I have the most brilliant cat in the world. Shoham, when he wants to come in, there's a little flashlight hanging out on the door, and he'll start slapping the flashlight. I basically call it he's ringing the doorbell. But should I let him in? Nah, he's just gonna go crazy in here. He's got a lot of energy, so he can stay out for a little while longer. Okay, let's move on. Okay, verse 20. O giben, o dak, o tivalul, ba'ino, o garav, o yalefet, o miroach ashech. Okay, so again, we have all these different types of blemishes. I think the best way to handle this would just be to go to one of the translations. So verse 20. I'm sorry, verse 19. Oh, I skipped verse 19. So verse 19. O ish asher ebo shever rachel or shever yod. So anyone who has a broken leg or hand. So broken doesn't mean that he just broke it, playing football. It means deformed in some way. Okay. And I would imagine that's how Robert Alter is going to translate it. I just translate it as broken, and he has a comment. Let's see. As Baruch Levine notes, given the limitations of ancient medicine, broken bones would usually have resulted in a permanent deformity. Okay, fair enough. Okay, I mean, literally it is broken. It's shever. Okay, verse 20. Oh, we just read that. Let's get a translation. So these words here, again, it's not exactly 100% clear what they mean. So nor a hunchback, nor a midget, nor one with a cataract in his eye, nor scab, nor skin flake, nor crushed testicle. Okay? So basically, anyone you would pay to be a bowling ball at your birthday party is out. I'm sorry. Bad joke. Was Rashi an ex-goy? No. It was not. Rashi was from France, medieval France. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so we get all these different types of deformities. I think we get the idea. Okay. And again, I think these are examples. These are not exhaustive, but rather illustrative. Okay. These are examples. If there are other deformities which are not covered here, then by logic, they would also make such a Kohen, it would be improper for him to serve in the temple. Again, that doesn't mean he's not a Kohen. It doesn't mean he can't take on other tasks outside of the temple, but he would not be serving in the temple, where the aesthetic is extremely important. Things have to look beautiful, smell beautiful. Right? In fact, the sacrifices that are brought are often referred to as a reach nichoach, sweet smelling scent to Yahweh. When Yahweh will see them, will smell them, figuratively speaking, of course, and it will be counted in your favor. Okay. The incense had a beautiful smell, and so on and so forth. So to illustrate the point, I mean, I don't think it needs to be illustrated because a lot of times the Torah is giving examples rather than giving an exhaustive list. But we couldn't give an exhaustive list. There are so many different types of deformities and blemishes that there would be no room in a written Torah, which does not imply an oral Torah in the way that the rabbis mean it, but in the written Torah, there would be no room to write every single possible blemish, deformity. So the Torah gives ideas, and then it's the judges, or in this case, maybe the priests, who will determine each case based on its own merits, its own situation. Okay? So verse 21, Kol ish asher bomum, mizera Aharon hakohen, lo yigash nakriv et ishe Yahweh. Stop there. That's the first half of the verse. So any person who has a blemish from among any person from among the seed of Aaron, the descendants of Aaron, the male descendants of Aaron, who has a blemish, Aaron the Kohen, who has a blemish, lo yigash lakriv et ishe Yahweh, shall not approach to bring forth the fire offerings. What are the fire offerings? The fire offerings specifically mean those offerings that are thrown onto the altar, onto the fire of the altar. Okay. Et ishe Yahweh, mumbo, he has a blemish, he has a deformity. Et lechem Elohau, lo yigash lehakriv. So therefore, he shall not approach to bring forth the food of his God. And that's just the way it is. Okay. And I think the fact that we have verse 21 here, which kind of says, so a Kohen who has a blemish, I think the implication here is any type of blemish, right? So that supports the idea that the list that we saw above, midget and someone whose testicles are crushed and someone who's blind, someone who's lame, etc., it's not an exhaustive list. Those are examples, and anyone or any priest who has any type of significant blemish, which could mar the aesthetic of the proceedings, is therefore prohibited, is therefore left outside of performing that service. Okay. Verse 22. Verse 22. Lechem Elohau. Let's see if Robert Alter has any kind of comment on that. No. So, verse 22. Lechem Elohau. Mikadshe HaKodeshim Umin HaKodeshim Yochel. So this is exactly, okay. So this is exactly what we've been saying. And this is important. It doesn't completely extricate him, or it doesn't completely put him outside of the priesthood. So Lechem Elohau Mikadshe Kedoshim. So the food of his God from the Holy of Holies. There were certain types, and we didn't make a list, but maybe next time we go around it, whenever that happens, we should make a list. There are certain types of sacrifices which are called Kadosh Kedoshim, Holy of Holies, and others which are just referred to as Kedoshim, Holy. It doesn't matter now, but it's basically all of these sacrifices that are brought and thrown on the altar. So such a Kohen with a blemish, a Kohen with a deformity may eat them. Okay, so let me translate literally. Lechem Elohau mi kadosh kedoshim. So the food of his God from among the Holy of Holies, and umin kadoshim, and from among the holies yochel, he shall eat, or he can eat. So again, he can eat when there are certain sacrifices we learned about that the Kohanim will eat part of the sacrifices. And there's certain parts that are given to the Kohanim. So he can eat those parts. He just cannot be the one who is performing the sacrifice. Okay, so he gets his rights as a Kohen to eat of the sacrifices, but he cannot be the one officiating the sacrifice. Okay, and I think Robert Alter has something to say here. Verse 22. The physical deformity does not disqualify the man from his priestly prerequisite of a share in the sacrifices. Otherwise, he would have no source of sustenance. But he's not permitted, verse 23, to approach the altar to offer the sacrifice. Okay? And it's going to be reiterated in verse 23. So, el haparochet lo yavo, wa el hamizbeach lo yigash. So he should not come to the parochet. What's the parochet? The parochet is, we spoke about it when we were dealing with the sacrifices. The parochet is the curtain that separates the holy area from the Holy of Holies inside the tent of meeting. The holy area is the area that has the three pieces of furniture. On the left, the menorah. When you walk in, you're heading east to west. When you walk in, on the left, the menorah. On the right, the showbread. And in the middle, the incense altar. And then there's a curtain. And behind that curtain is the Holy of Holies. Another chamber, the innermost chamber. And that's where the Ark of the Covenant is, with the Ark cover on top, with the cherubim on the Ark cover. And that's where the Kavod Yahweh, the glory of Yahweh, dwells between the cherubim on the cover of the Ark. Inside the Ark was the tablets of the covenant. And so when it says shall not come to the parochet, to this separation, maybe we should bring up again a little map here. I think this is the one we usually use. Hello. Okay, so this is the holy area. This is the Holy of Holies, and right here is where the parochet is, where the curtain is. And we know for some sacrifices, you have to walk inside here, and then the Kohen Gadol, I believe it's the Kohen Gadol, not a regular Kohen. I have to go back and look. Escapes me right now. But the Kohen Gadol, if I'm not mistaken, then will take blood from the sacrifice and sprinkle it 7 times onto this curtain. So what this verse is saying is that a priest with a blemish is not allowed to do that. And he's also not allowed to come to the altar of sacrifice. The altar of sacrifice is right here, the brazen altar. That's where all of the animal sacrifices were thrown, okay, onto this altar of sacrifice. So he's not allowed to basically perform any of the priestly ceremonial duties within the temple, but he is allowed to eat of those sacrifices. That is the payment to the priests. That is the payment to the Cohanim. Okay. 23. Ach ela parochet lo yavo ve'ela mizbeach lo yigash. You read that? Kimumbo. So I'll just read it again. So he shall not approach the curtain, which separates the holy area from the Holy of Holies. And he shall not come to the curtain. He shall not approach the altar of sacrifice. Kimumbo, because he has a deformity. There's the deformity in him, upon him. Velo yichalel et mikdashai ki ani Yahweh mikadsham. And he shall not profane my sanctuary, my holy place. And remember, we said now a number of times what the word profane means. Profane doesn't mean profanity in the colloquial sense. It means taking something special and making it into something average, something normal. So the classic example, I should go drink another glass of water. The classic example that I always give is the 6 days of the week and Shabbat. So Shabbat is a special day. You're not allowed to do any work on the Shabbat. It's a holy day. And if you do work on the Shabbat, if you just do things that you would do on an average day, I'm snaking the toilet today. I've been meaning to do it for 3 weeks, and I'll do it today on Shabbat. And the roof needs a little bit of repair, and I gotta weed out back. Right? You are taking the Shabbat, which is a holy day, and you're profaning it. You're turning it into something that is mundane, that is average. That is the real meaning of the word profane. It means taking something special, taking something set aside, holy, and turning it into something average. Taking Shabbat and turning it into a Tuesday. That is profane. And these are two opposites. Okay, halal or lechalel and lekadesh. Lechalel means to take the special and make it average, to make it regular. And lekadesh means to take something and make it special. Okay, so what Yahweh doesn't like is taking things that are set aside as holy, as special, as set apart for him, okay, or related to him, and just turning them to something regular. That's the idea here. And so if a priest with a blemish serves in the temple, tabernacle/temple, then he's taking this very special place. He's not profaning it in the colloquial sense of the word, right? He's not having sex with a prostitute in it, right? It's not profanity in that sense. He's taking it and he's making it just into another average place. Because a person with a blemish would have to go to the supermarket, would have to, take a taxi cab, do all these regular things. So those are average things. And if someone with a blemish comes into or performs the ceremonies in the tabernacle/temple, then he's basically turning it into an average thing, like going to the supermarket, taking a cab. Okay, and that's the idea here. Okay, the Beit HaMikdash, the tabernacle, the temple, they're special places. It's, again, the analogy I always like to give is the White House. You're not going to, although in this day and age, you never know anymore, but you're not going to show up to the White House, in like a tank top and shorts and a bunch of tattoos. Okay, you could show up to your mom's house that way. You shouldn't even do that. You could show up to, I don't know, the supermarket that way. You can ride the bus that way, but you don't go to the White House dressed in your street clothes. Okay, if you go to the White House, you're going to dress in your best clothes because it's a special place in American culture. It's the same idea here. The Mikdash, the tabernacle/temple area within the courtyard there, is a special place. You dress your best. You're you're clean, ritually clean. You don't have the cooties on you. You are you're in God's special place, and you have to look and act the part, especially if you're partaking. Okay. And verse 24, Vidaber Moshe el Aaron wa'el banao. So Moses spoke to Aaron and his sons, wa'el kol bnei Israel, and all of the children of Israel. Okay. So that completes Leviticus chapter 21. See if there's any other commentaries. For editorial reasons that remain obscure to us, this chapter concludes atypically with a report of Moses speaking that is not followed by a speech, and thus appears to refer retrospectively to the speech just delivered. Right. So okay. Read the Hebrew again. Let's see exactly what his problem is here. So this is the usual formulaic introduction of something that's about to be said, but nothing after it is said. We have here what's called the Parsha Ptucha. This is basically a chapter ending in the Masoretic texts, in the standard text of the Bible. So what Robert Alter is saying is that this is strange that this would come at the end. This formulation usually comes at the beginning, and I'll say something else about this, which is that it also says, what struck me when I read it, Vidaber Moshe el Aaron ve'el benao. So Moses spoke to Aaron and his sons, el kol bnei Israel, and to all of the children of Israel. But these laws only really, this chapter 21, all of these laws have to do only with Aaron and his sons, only with the priests. And usually when that's the case, it doesn't say to all of the children of Israel. It only says to all of the children of Israel, El Bnei Israel. It says El Kol Bnei Israel, but usually says El Bnei Israel if it's laws that directly involve them. But these are laws that affect only the priests, only the priesthood. And usually the formula there would be that Vidaber Moshe el Aaron or el Banao, or Vidaber Moshe el Yidaber Yahweh el Moshe lemor, or el Vidaber Moshe el I'm sorry, Vidaber Yahweh el Moshe or el Aaron lemor. Okay, but here it includes all the children of Israel. So I agree, this is a bit strange. That should be here. Let's see maybe what Ibn Ezra has to say about that one. Where did Ibn Ezra go? Oh boy. Ben, let's go down a bit more. I'm really upset that they don't have the English for this anymore. Maybe, I bet I know why. This is Sfari. Maybe I have to go to Sfari.org, change the language to English. Let's see what happens. That's probably the reason it's picking up that I'm in Israel. So maybe I could change the language. 1 second here. There we go. Okay. Now we go to Tanakh. Then we go to 18% off Hanukkah gifts. Whoa. Then we go to Ibn Ezra. Then we go to Leviticus. Then we go to 21. Okay, good. Now we're getting our English translation, which is very helpful, because medieval Hebrew can be a little bit confusing at times. It's different from biblical Hebrew. So, verse 24. One second. Okay, so verse 24. Now it doesn't have the Hebrew. I want the Hebrew and the English. What happens if I do that? Oh, I see. I can switch back and forth. Okay. All right. We'll just stick with the English for now. Okay. And to all the children, if it were not for the tradition, and he's talking about the rabbinical oral law, we would interpret and unto all the children of Israel as meaning that those who are blemished should not slaughter peace offerings for the children of Israel. Now, since scripture mentions that a blemished Kohen may eat that which is holy, it warns in the section which follows that the one who eats sacred food must be. Okay. This is very rabbinical. So, and let me look at the Hebrew. El kol b'nei Yisrael shelo yizbach lehem shlamim ba'alimum le'hakabbalah v'ba'avur she'iski ba'al mum yach. So this is very strange. So apparently the rabbis say, and I think I remember learning this many years ago, that a blemished Kohen is actually allowed to slaughter peace offerings. So, wow, if this is true, and it's been a while since I remember learning this, I'd have to go back and check. If this is true, then this is an example where the oral law of the rabbis is in direct contradiction to what the Torah is telling us. They've actually taken away from the Torah here, or added to the Torah, I guess, depending on how you look at it. I'd say take away from the Torah. Because the peace offerings are thrown on the altar. This is actually, wow. This is actually kind of shocking. So, okay, we're at the end of Leviticus 21. Let me switch over to the English right now. Let's go to look at the peace offerings, which I think is Leviticus chapter 3, if I remember correctly. So they call them fellowship offerings, but that's the peace offering. Okay. They just translate as fellowship instead of peace, same thing. And even here you can see they translate it as peace offerings, right? So these peace or fellowship offerings, okay? So just very briefly, let's read it. If your offering is a peace offering, fellowship or peace offering, and you offer an animal from the herd, whether male or female you are to present before Yahweh an animal without defect. So Robert Alter made a good point before. Just as the animals we sacrifice have to be cannot be blemished, so the Cohanim also cannot be, who do the sacrificing, cannot be blemished, right? But it's for a slightly different reason. If you bring Yahweh a blemished animal, then you're bringing him not the best. You're bringing him like the leftover. You're keeping the best for yourself, and you're bringing Yahweh the worst. Okay, you are to lay your hand on the head of your offering and slaughter it at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Then Aaron's sons, the priests, shall splash the blood against the sides of the altar. From the fellowship, again, fellowship, I'm just going to translate as peace. It's the same thing. From the peace offering, you are to bring a food offering to Yahweh. And whenever it's a food offering, that really means, well, no, maybe it doesn't. Maybe that also would include grains. Both kidneys, okay, the internal organs and all the fat there that is connected to them. So, yeah, of course, these are the forbidden fats. Both kidneys with the fat on them near the loins and the long lobe of the liver, which you will remove with the kidneys. Then Aaron's sons are to burn it on the altar on top of the burnt offering that is lying on the burning wood. It is a food offering, an aroma pleasing to Yahweh. And we can go on and on about the peace offerings. But basically, we see that the peace offerings, these are the fats, the quote-unquote forbidden fats, let me just see something here for 1 second. Right, and then elsewhere, if I remember, it says what happens with the rest of the peace offering. But it doesn't matter. We see that these peace offerings are fire offerings. They're thrown onto the altar. They're thrown onto the altar of sacrifice, onto this altar right here. And if I'm understanding correctly, which I believe I am, what Ibn Ezra is saying, he's saying that the oral, quote unquote, oral law never ever call it an oral law. When the rabbis call it an oral law, that is propaganda. That is rabbinical propaganda. Shabbat shalom. Thank you, Paul. So when the rabbis call it an oral law, that is rabbinical propaganda. You should never call it an oral law. You should always call it the traditions. The interpretations of the rabbis, or even better yet, the distorted interpretations of the rabbis, or the incorrect interpretations of the rabbis. That would be the correct way to refer to what they call an oral law. Remember, when they call it an oral law, they're trying to sell you snake oil. They're trying to sell you they're used car salesmen trying to sell you a jalopy that doesn't run, but they're telling you that it's a brand new Ferrari. And how are they doing that? By calling it the oral law, they want to tell you that it's been passed down from generation to generation since the time of Moses, essentially. And although the smarter rabbis have a little bit more of a sophisticated approach, but it doesn't matter. That's essentially what they're saying, the same thing, that it's been passed down from the time of Moses. And so if it's been passed down from the time of Moses, I'm going to go get a glass of water in a second. Why do they have to call it? Why? Or I'm sorry, if it's been passed down from the time of Moses, why is there no written evidence of it? Oh, because it's an oral law. It's been passed down orally. That's the trick they're trying to play. They're trying to say that their bizarre interpretations of the Torah, their incorrect, their distorted interpretations of the Torah are not made up by them in the Second Temple and post-Second Temple period, but that they've been passed down since the time of Moses. And that's why you should accept them. That's why you should believe them. Yes, it's not actually snake oil. It's actually, fine olive oil. No, it's not actually a jalopy that can barely run. It's a brand new Ferrari. And I have a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn. And that's exactly what the rabbis are doing when they call it. And they've they've gotten their idea across so effectively that we even call it an oral law. I never refer to it as an oral law for years. If I say the oral law, if I need to explain what I'm talking about to rabbinites or people who need to know that I'm talking about what's generally considered or generally called the oral law, I'll always put the words oral law in double quotes. But really what it is it's just the distorted interpretations of the Torah done by the Pharisees / rabbis. Again, why do they want to call it an oral law? Because they have no evidence. There's no written evidence that a lot of their bizarre interpretations existed before the Middle Second Temple period. So how do they want to tell you? How do they want to explain why there's no written record of their bizarre interpretations? They say it's been passed down secretly. It's been passed down orally, only orally and never written down. Well, I have news for you, folks. Even things that have been passed down orally will leave their traces somewhere. They'll leave their traces somewhere in the historical record. They'll leave their traces somewhere in the archaeological record. They'll leave their traces somewhere in the official written record of a society. And yet, there's no evidence of many of the basic elements of the so-called quote-unquote oral law of the rabbis anywhere. Not in the archaeological record, not in the external historical record, not in the official written record of our people before the time that the rabbis rose to power. So, for instance, the classic example is tefillin. Okay, I actually just ordered a book, which I read parts of in the past, but I've been meaning to read the whole thing. It's going to arrive to my my family's house in New York, so I'll pick it up when I get there, since I am planning to make a trip to the United States soon. And again, for those of you who missed at the beginning, if you would like, I'll be in the New York area. I don't know exactly when. I'm trying to shoot for the end of December, for maybe a couple weeks up to a month. And if you want to meet up in the New York area, just let me know. We can meet up. You're paying for the coffee. That's it. I don't charge anything for anything. For years I've been doing this, so that's it. I'm charging a cup of coffee. That's it. You guys pay for the coffee. Anywho, so the point is being 100% serious is that is the lie that the rabbis want to sell us. And so you should never ever I'll think about it, Paul. I'll think about it. But you should never ever fall into their trap and never ever call it an oral law. And if you do need to call it an oral law so that other people know what you're talking about, always put it in quotes. But then I would always clarify and say the distorted interpretations, Torah interpretations of the rabbis. Okay, so getting back to the issue at hand. So if what the Ibn Ezra is saying is that a Kohen with a blemish, according to the oral law, the quote unquote oral law, according to the, and now we see just how distorted they are, the distorted and bizarre misinterpretations of the Torah by the rabbis, a Kohen can, who is blemished in all of the ways we read in the previous verses, can actually bring a peace offering. He's not allowed to bring the other types of offerings. Remember, there were 5 types of offerings. Okay, let's go over the 5 types of offerings. There, excuse me. There is the burnt offering. There is the peace offering. There is the sin offering. There is the guilt offering, and there is the grain offering. Those are the 5 types of offerings. So what the rabbis are saying, according to the Ibn Ezra here, which is absolutely shocking, is that even though we read very clearly here in Leviticus 21 that a blemished Kohen cannot bring any type of offering that goes onto the fire, that goes onto the altar of sacrifice, onto the fire, that they can actually officiate bringing the peace offerings for the children of Israel. This is sick, honestly. Unless I'm totally missing something, which I suppose is always possible, but I don't see it. What this is saying, and I think I'll do a post on this in Facebook or something like that. What this is saying, unless I'm completely misinterpreting it, which I don't think I am, is that the rabbis are allowing blemished priests to bring peace offerings. And there's no evidence for that anywhere in the written Torah, as far as I can see. So we see here a classic example of how the rabbis distorted the Torah with their bizarre interpretations, which they try to sell us as the quote-unquote oral law. And what they're doing is they are adding to and taking away from the Torah. We know there are a number of statements of that in the Torah. Let's go look at one. That's going to be Deuteronomy chapter 4. Okay, I'll just read the English and then we can go over to the Hebrew. So Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 1. Now, Israel, hear the decrees and laws I'm about to teach you. This is one of Moses' speeches. Follow them so that you may live and may go in and take possession of the land. The land Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, is giving you. Do not add to what I command you, and do not subtract from it, but keep the commandments of Yahweh, your God, that I give you. Okay? If we look at that in the Hebrew, so it's Deuteronomy 4, chapter 4, verse 2. Very important verse as a Karaite to remember. Just remember 4:2. Deuteronomy 4:2. It's easy to remember. 2 is half of 4. Okay? And if I read it in the Hebrew, Lo tusifu al hadavar asher anochi misaweh etchem velo tigra'u. I want to do the proper Tiberian or ancient Hebrew pronunciation. Mimenu lishmor et miswoth Yahweh Elohechem asher anochi misaweh etchem. Okay. Lo tusifu ala davar asher anochi mitzaveh etchem. Do not add to that which I am commanding you, which I have commanded you. Velo tigra'u mimenu. Do not take away from it. Lishmor et mitzvot. Rather, keep the commandments of Yahweh Elohechem, of Yahweh your God, asher anochi mitzaveh etchem, that I command you. who's the I, Moses. Moses is telling us a bunch of commandments that Yahweh gave him, and we're not to add to it, we're not to take away from it. And here we see a blatant, it's really blatant. It's not only is it blatant, it's more than blatant. It's just, what's the word? Azut. How do we just say that? Not bold. I'm trying to think the correct word in English. It's just not blatant. Oh God, like there's a certain word that I can't think of it right now in the English, but we'll just go with blatant, right? It's just a disgustingly blatant violation of the commandment not to add to the Torah and not to take away from the Torah, and it's extremely serious violation, because what it means is we've been speaking since the beginning of the book of Leviticus, in fact earlier, right? When we read through Exodus, we've been speaking about the importance of the worship, the systematic, quote unquote, cultic. Again, when you hear the word cultic in this context, it doesn't mean cult like the Democrats. Cult means the systematic worship of a deity. Okay, so I'll just go with systematic. We know that the systematized worship of Yahweh includes very specific laws, and that it is meant to separate anything that is untoward. Is that the right word? That is not appropriate within the realm of God's home, within the realm of Yahweh's home. It's meant to separate it. So anyone who has the cooties, who's come in contact with the dead, who's had an emission of semen, who's touched a dead animal, is not to come within the province of Yahweh until he's been cleansed of those cooties. Likewise, we saw now how important, or we saw even just before when we read about the peace offering, how important it is, not about the peace offering, we read earlier about how important it is not to bring a blemished animal as a sacrifice, that's a disgrace to Yahweh. And now we see that Cohanim who are blemished, that also is not, it's not appropriate. It's unfortunate that they're blemished, that they're deformed in some way, but it's not appropriate for them to partake in the systematic service of Yahweh. And so it's very serious. We know how we've read, for instance, in Leviticus 16, how important it is to cleanse the holy areas of all of the inadvertent and perhaps deliberate transgressions of the nation of Israel on Yom Kippurim, from all of these violations of not treating the sanctuary of Yahweh with proper respect by following the rules that have been laid down. And here the rabbis come along and say, oh, it's no big deal. You can come along, and if it's a peace offering, then it's okay. A blemished Kohen can bring a peace offering. So no big deal. A Kohen with, and again, it's not any kind of moral judgment on a Kohen who has some kind of blemish, but a Kohen, let's say, who's missing an arm, or I don't know, missing a head, can now sacrifice a peace offering according, if I'm understanding this correctly, which I believe I am, according to the rabbis, they are profaning that which is holy. Exactly what we saw earlier, right? In fact, let's look back in Leviticus chapter 21. Right? Where was it? One second. Here, verse 23. Okay, so these Kohanim who have blemishes, they're allowed to eat of these sacrifices. But verse 23, but such a blemished Kohen shall not approach the separation curtain between the holy area and the holy of holy areas. The elam is beach lo yigash, and he shall not approach the altar of sacrifice, ki mumbo, because he is a deformity. Velo yichalel et mikdashai, and he shall not profane my holy place. Ki ani Yahweh mikadsham, because I, Yahweh, am the one who makes them holy, who makes you holy. Okay, them holy in this case. All right, and that's exactly what we're told. What we're told not to do, that by having a blemished Kohen officiate, that this is profaning. This is not respecting special nature, the holy nature and the special nature and the set apart nature of Yahweh's house. And yet here we see, according to Ibn Ezra, that the rabbis say that for a peace offering, they can actually go ahead and officiate, even though that involves approaching the altar, which we just saw in Leviticus 21, verse 23, that they're not allowed to approach the altar. We saw it explicitly, right? Right here. Wa'el hamizbeach lo yigash. Okay? Now, I'll go on a little bit of a rant or a tirade. Yeah, chutzpah, there you go. More than chutzpah. I'll go on a little bit of a rant and a tirade, and I will preface it by saying that this is speculation, but I think there might be truth to it. The rabbis, the Pharisees and the rabbis, they hated the Cohanim and the Levites. They needed to basically knock down or eliminate all of their rivals for power over Israel. And this, because that's the only way they were able to take power, by knocking down those who are traditionally, according to the Torah, supposed to have the positions of leadership and power and decision making in Israel, which would include the Kohen Gadol, the Kohanim, the Levites. It would include also the house of David. It would include also the prophets. It would include, that's enough, a couple more, but you get the idea, okay? Specifically in the Second Temple period times, we know the story of Hanukkah, which is coming up, and maybe we'll do a couple of lessons on Hanukkah or a lesson on Hanukkah. We know that as a result of the rebellion against the Seleucid Greeks, it was the Hasmonean dynasty, it was the Maccabees that established the Hasmonean dynasty in Israel, who ruled essentially until the Romans took over in 63 BCE. And so they ruled for, let's see, about 100 years, if not more. So the rabbis, and this is exactly the period when the rabbis were starting to rise to power. And the rabbis hated the Hasmoneans. There's a lot to say about this, but they always downplay the accomplishments of the Hasmoneans. And the Hasmoneans, first of all, they were Cohanim. The Maccabees were Cohanim, and the Hasmoneans, which grew out of them. I don't know if every Hasmonean leader, king, and there was one queen, was a Kohen, but they were Kohanic dynasty, and the rabbis hated them. And I think the main reason the rabbis hated them, the Pharisees at the time, I think the main reason the Pharisees hated them is that they were a threat to the power of the Pharisees. The Pharisees were trying to take over the nation, and the Hasmoneans, who were linked to one of the traditional leadership roles, or one of the leadership classes of Israel, meaning the Kohanim, the priests, were a threat, were blocking the Pharisees' ability to take over. So they needed to knock down the Hasmoneans. They needed to actively depose them, which they did by inviting Rome in, essentially to take over Israel, but also by downplaying their accomplishments, which is why the Hanukkah story, according to the rabbis, is not focusing on the accomplishments of the Maccabees and the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, but instead focusing on this legend of a flask of oil which was supposed to last for 1 day and lasted for 8 days, completely made up, found nowhere in the historical record. So they take the focus away from the accomplishments of the Maccabees and instead put it on some made-up miracle. So I don't want to get too off track. The basic bottom line is that the Pharisees, in my opinion, despite all their crocodile tears over the destruction of the Second Temple and over the destruction of the people of Israel, actually hated the people of Israel and made a determined, a premeditated attempt to destroy the traditional roles of leadership and power within the nation. And again, that would mean first and foremost the Kohanim and the Levites. So by coming up with a law which the Pharisees had no right to come up with because they were not Cohanim and Levites, by coming up with this law which basically changes the laws of the Cohanim and actually causes the Cohanim, if one were to follow this, to violate the very laws of the Torah, and therefore to perhaps bring punishment upon themselves, right? Maybe they were trying to get the Cohanim, they were trying to knock down the Cohanim from their special place, and perhaps even get them deliberately to sin by coming up with these laws so that they could therefore knock down the power of the Cohanim so that they could take over the nation for themselves and go on to come up with their fake quote-unquote oral law, which is actually a bizarre and distorted distortions of the Torah, which have plagued our nation for 2,000 years down to this very day. So that is my rant. But I think there might be a lot of truth to that rant, even though I can't prove it, because the Pharisees are not going to say we're doing this in order to knock down the Cohanim, in order to deliberately cause the Cohanim to sin, in order to take away the specialness of the Cohanim. Oh, they're just like everyone else. They don't have to have only unblemished priests. Yeah, they have to kind of. We can't get rid of it all because that'll be too obvious. But we'll make a little petach. We'll make a little opening whereby we can have the Cohanim act like regular people or outright defy the laws of the Torah that we see very clearly here in Leviticus 21. And that's why, thank God, I'm a Karaite, not a rabbinical Jew. And thank God for you guys here that so are you. So you can see the lies and the deceit and the deliberate deception that the rabbis tried to sneakily introduce into the laws of the people of Israel. Okay, rant over. We've come to the end of Leviticus chapter 21. At this point, maybe I'll open it up for some questions or comments. Just give me 1 second. I think I have to turn up the heat. It's already nighttime here. It's a little bit chilly. Be right back, and maybe I should drink a little bit of water. Just give me a second. I'll be right back. Okay. Any questions, any comments? Suri, that would be a very, very long book. A very long book. But maybe I will do a video on this specific issue as an example. All right. Any questions, any comments? Okay. If not, then let's start wrapping up. And we'll start on Leviticus chapter 22. We're actually approaching the end of Leviticus. We're getting close. So Leviticus is 26 chapters. We're now, 27 chapters. We're up to 22. Which I guess we'll start next week. Let's see, it's 7:20 here. Should we start 22? We started here at 4:45. I think maybe that's long enough for today. We'll just maybe do an introduction. Okay, so let's look in the English at Leviticus 22 so we can get an idea of what we're going to be dealing with next week. So here we go. So Yahweh says to Moses, tell Aaron and his sons to treat with respect the sacred offerings the Israelites consecrate to me, so they will not profane my holy name. I am Yahweh. Say to them, for the generations to come, if any of your descendants is ceremonially unclean and yet comes near the sacred offerings that the Israelites consecrate to Yahweh, that person must be cut off from my presence. I am Yahweh. Okay. If a descendant of Aaron has a defiling skin disease or bodily discharge, he may not eat the sacred offerings until he is cleansed. So that we saw already when we were speaking about issues of cooties and how to get rid of them. Okay. When you're in a state of uncleanliness, you're not allowed to have anything, or you're not allowed to come in contact with anything that's set aside to Yahweh. And that includes coming within the province of the tabernacle / temple, or eating of the foods that are set aside to Yahweh, the holy foods. Okay. Now, this is not like a blemish. This is temporary, because we know that in these cases, so for instance, defiling skin disease, like tzara'at, like quote unquote leprosy, bodily discharge, we know that there's a process to get out of these things. So it's not permanent, it's temporary. We saw that if it's permanent, if a Kohen has a permanent blemish, then he is allowed to eat. So if he's missing an arm, or I don't know, has horrible burn marks on his face or something like that from being caught in war, or missing an eye, got all these horrible things, then he is allowed to eat of the holy foods, because that's his sustenance as a Kohen. Okay. At any rate, this is going on to other things. I think we should end it here. I think I've said pretty much all I want to say for today. So unless there are any other final questions or comments, yeah, it will be an encyclopedia, sorry. Then we'll call it a day for today. My pleasure. Sorry, and everybody else, is what I love to do. So I thank you for being part of it. This is my passion in life, as you guys probably know pretty well by now, for those of you who know me. Okay. I guess we're going to end it here. Any final words? Anybody want to say anything or ask anything before we go? If not, then we will go out with some music as usual. And as I mentioned, I did take a week or two off. I may do that from time to time in the future, again, because I'm now integrating more into the Jewish community here in Katzrin and the Golan Heights. But I'm going to try really to, these Torah studies are extremely important. And I'm going to try to continue to be quite consistent with them. But I do permit myself to take a week or two off every so often. Okay. All right. Let me grab some music here. See if we can find something nice. And we'll say goodbye for today. So I thank all of you for joining me today on this World Alliance of Qara'im weekly Shabbat Torah study. Please spread the word. I don't know, subscribe, like, all those spready wordy things. And wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov, depending on where you are in the world. Hope you all have a great week and enjoy the rest of your Shabbat. And Be'ezarat Yahweh, we will see you again next week. Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיני אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. אוי 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 אוי, שיר למעלות, אשא עיני אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. אוי 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 אוי, שיר למעלות.